Objection, so ordered. I now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock, for 5 minutes to explain the legislation. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're all well aware of the human and economic tragedy that occurred in California's Central Valley in 2009 and 2010, when hundreds of billions of gallons of contracted water were diverted to the ocean in the name of the Delta Smelt. This policy fallowed between 250,000 and 500,000 acres of some of the most productive farmland in America. It threw thousands of hard-working families into unemployment. It devastated communities throughout the region, and it created the spectacle of food lines handing out carrots imported from China in a region which just a year before produced much of the fruits and vegetables in the United States. In the 111th Congress, the then minority Republicans on the subcommittee asked repeatedly for hearings to address this catastrophe, but to no avail. Finally, we held an informal field hearing where we heard firsthand of the human suffering these policies caused. Last year, we returned to hold a formal hearing to take testimony on what could be done to correct this disaster. As a result of these hearings, Mr. Nunez introduced H.R. 1837. The most significant part of this bill restores the principles for agreement on the Bay Delta standards between the State of California and the federal government, better known as the Bay Delta Accord, and codifies the flows established in that agreement. The Bay Delta Accord received bipartisan support and served as the basis for project operations from 1994 until 2007, when the water diversions began. In 1992, provisions of the Central Valley Improvement Act imposed a superstructure of regulations and restrictions that would have severely limited the ability of a willing seller and a willing buyer to move water from areas of surplus to areas of shortage. These voluntary transactions provided for efficient and rapid assignment of water throughout the system. This bill restores the freedom of exchange on pre-existing agreements between water contractors throughout the system. The bill also brings transparency and accountability to the Central Valley Project Restoration Fund, which has spent over $800 million in water and ratepayer money. The subcommittee received ample testimony that natural ocean currents and invasive non-native predators such as striped bass pose a far greater threat to native fish populations than the Delta pumps. The currents are beyond our control, of course, but this measure strengthens our ability to control non-native predators that are decimating native endangered fish populations in the Delta. It also encourages the use of fish hatcheries to economically and dramatically increase native fish populations such as salmon and the Delta smelt. It replaces the San Joaquin River Settlement Act that was imposed in 2009 with a workable and vastly less expensive alternative. Now, let me put the current San Jose Settlement Act in perspective. It spends more than $1 billion to achieve the stated goal of establishing a population of 500 salmon below the Friant Dam. That comes to $2 million per fish, and that's without accounting for the costs that will be incurred by Central Valley farmers as water that's already in critically short supply is diverted to this project that are estimated to increase the actual cost by some tenfold. Finally, the bill includes provisions to encourage recycling of environmental water, and it removes pricing mechanisms that have discouraged water banking and early repayment of federal loans. The subcommittee held 2 public hearings on this measure, which included twice as many minority witnesses as majority witnesses. During these hearings, a serious and legitimate concern was expressed that the unique interaction of state and federal jurisdictions posed the risk that restoring the original water agreements could jeopardize senior water rights holders if the state turned to them to replace that water. As a result, we began a laborious 8-month process of consulting more than 60 Northern California water agencies in both Democratic and Republican congressional districts, and the result is an unprecedented consensus reflected in the amendments that I will present in a few minutes. The sum total of this work broadens the measure to resolve long-standing disputes between Northern and Central California water users and brings the full force of federal law to protect the senior water rights held by Northern California areas of origin and assures greater access to water by the communities throughout the region. I would urge its adoption.
Further discussion, the gentlelady from California, the ranking member of the subcommittee, would wish to seek time.
I certainly do.
The gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and On this bill, we still have very, very, very strong objections on Valentine's Day. The majority delivered the people of the state of California a box full of empty Valentines and promise with only a 1.5-day notice, a markup, prior notice to this markup. Over the last 8 months, the majority has negotiated over 24 changes to the introduced version of H.R. 1837 without any input on the language from all stakeholders, including the California water agencies and certainly my constituency. H.R. 1837 claims to restore the flow of water to beleaguered communities in the world's most productive and highly valued agricultural region. Let's be clear on the reality. This radical legislation will negatively impact how water is managed in the state of California, amends our state constitution, and will undermine California's ability to manage its own resources. It would repeal or overturn nearly 20 years of environmental protections under the Central Valley Project Improvement Act, called CVPIA, and the Endangered Species Act, ESA. Would repeal the court-ordered San Joaquin Restoration Settlement Act, a compromise that took over almost 20 years to reach and was widely supported by a variety of stakeholders. This original settlement had two primary goals. One, restoration, the restoration goal to restore and maintain fish populations in good condition in the upper San Joaquin River. Secondly, a water management goal to reduce and avoid adverse water supply impacts to all Friant Division long-term contractors that may result from these restoration flows. By passing this bill out of the committee, one step closer to creating drastic legal and water rights uncertainty for all stakeholders and possibly dramatic cuts to the water diversions. This is a good bill for lawyers. As written, it locks up water contracts with no environmental mitigation and in perpetuity. It also preempts and supersedes any state law, any regulation or requirement that imposes more restrictive requirements or regulations for activities authorized under this bill. It overturns 110 years of reclamation law. It undermines the ongoing state and federal efforts under the Bay Delta Conservation Plan. Despite the changes by the majority, H.R. 1837 still seeks to make sweeping and dramatic changes to the CVPIA. It extends water contracts to 40 years and continues in perpetuity without completion of any environmental mitigation or consideration of climate change. Removes tiered water pricing aimed at encouraging water conservation and efficiency, and also diminishes funds for restoration. It completely eliminates the co-equal goal of protecting the environment and allowing for water deliveries. Violations of these laws were the basis for the litigation by the NRC Council in 1988, and it puts the jobs of fishermen highly at risk. It preempts states' rights. The state rights are a historic and fundamental principle. It is the usurping of state rights sets bad precedent and should not be taken lightly. This litigation also severely limits ongoing environmental protection efforts and deems that requirements of the ESA are met at levels established by scientific analysis used in the 1994 Bay Delta Accord. Ecosystems change, that's a fact. Using 20-year-old ecosystem science is akin to treating a patient today based on vital measurements for 20 years ago. Does not make sense. Since introduction, we've received nearly 36 letters in opposition, and I'm submitting for the record a list of over, I would say, about 50, 60 letters in opposition. It includes the state legislature, Senator Pro Tem Steinberg, Speaker Perez, the Senate, Boxer Feinstein, Assembly Chairs of Natural Resources in the state of California, Water, Parks, Wildlife. In a signed letter stated it undermines judicial agreements, erodes longstanding water principles, usurps California's sovereignty, and lays waste to any hope of progress in the Delta. I might add it also usurps other states' rights. Eventually, fishing industries, there's no word, this is their quote, to describe the complete devastation this bill would bring to the Central Valley salmon runs and those who depend on them for their livelihood, recreation, and food sources. From the Central Delta Water Agency, this bill would transfer responsibility of complying with state river flow and quality protections above the Bay Delta Accord to non-export project water rights holders who, under California law, are senior to the exporters. The San Joaquin Reliability Act has nothing to do with reliability and everything to do with uncertainty. It does not create jobs, and I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will yield to Mr. Garamendi if he so wishes. Thank you.
Time of the gentlelady has expired. The gentleman from California, Mr. Denham, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sure there's going to be plenty of opportunity to discuss a variety of different topics on this bill as it pertains to amendments, but I want to just get the record straight on a couple of issues. First of all, people in my district aren't looking for Valentines. They're looking for jobs. When you put 30 to 50,000 people out of work, when you've gone and stood in the bread lines that I've had to stand in, you know, people, farm workers, truck drivers, tractor drivers, but also the grocery stores where people aren't able to buy groceries anymore, or the car lots where people aren't buying cars anymore. You've completely shut down and devastated entire communities. Mendota, 40% unemployment. I mean, the Central Valley alone, double the national unemployment rate, which is why bipartisanly we continue to ask the President to go visit the Central Valley. Now, I know he's there today raising money in L.A. He'll be in San Francisco tomorrow. But come to look at the Central Valley. Look at the challenges that we have. We invite the President again to take a look at the high foreclosure rate, look at the highest unemployment rate, something that's double the rest of the nation. But by county, when you're getting 20% unemployment by county because we've shut down the water, because there is no certainty, because farmers not only have pulled their trees, but are in a position that they can't even go to the bank as they plan to plant new crops. This bill has been something that's been in the works for quite some time now. You know, I appreciate the transparency that has been gone on for the last year, holding hearings in our district, holding hearings here. The bill that's come up that has garnered over a dozen assembly members in the state assembly, but also water districts up and down the valley, throughout the state. Water districts that typically don't have a lot of commonality between them have been able to come together because this brings back the water rights that they had agreed to in the Bay Delta Accord that was agreed upon at one time. This has also brought members together who, again, normally don't agree on water. You know, there's certainly a number of fights between North and Central and South. This has been done in such a way that it restores the water rights so that we can all work together and solve our economic issue together, putting people back to work. Ultimately, what we've got to agree to is certainty. And going back to the Bay Delta Accord certainly does that. Along with the farm bureaus and a number of different ag groups throughout the valley, we also have a number of different board of supervisors as well as cities up and down from my district to Jim Costa's district to going through Devon's district all the way down to McCarthy's district. But we have a number of different cities up and down the valley that have been struck with this high unemployment rate. Let me just finish by reading a quote. President Bill Clinton, when he signed the Bay Delta Accord, it puts an end to a bitter conflict that has persisted for decades. This is a solution that serves all the people of California. And Governor Pete Wilson at the time, peace is broken out amid the water wars. This was an opportunity to have both parties to come together, the federal and state to come together to agree to the Bay Delta Accord. Since then, several different other issues have been interceded on federal law that have now taken the water away from the Central Valley. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from California, Mr. Costa first, and then Mr. Garamendi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. H.R. 1837 is before us. Like any other piece of legislation we are dealing with, it's certainly not perfect. It's a work in progress. But I intend to support the legislation because of a number of important sections that I think it contains. This bill tackles many issues that I have been working on and others have for many, many years. But let me be clear, no one has done more than yours truly to bring water to the San Joaquin Valley in the near term and the short term. From the completion of the intertie, which has been operational as of last month, 35,000 acre-feet, the authorization of the Kern County Water Bank, 1.2 million acre-feet of water, the raising of Cahuilla Reservoir, 48,000 acre-feet of water back in the late 1990s. The list goes on and on. I have been a fighter for water for our valley for the entire career that I've had in Sacramento and now here in our nation's capital. Titles 1 and 3 aim to address one of the biggest challenges for water policy in California. In light of the drought that we had in 2009 and 2010, not only did we have a hydrological drought, but we had a regulatory drought. Sections 1 and 3 go a long ways, including the recent court decisions last year with the biological opinions, to provide administrative clarity to allow us the flexibility necessary. This year we're at 18% of normal snowpack. Last year we were at 174%. We need that operational flexibility. Who knows? We hope it will rain a lot in March. However, we are faced again with this potential challenge. The measure is similar in concept to legislation that I introduced with Congressman Cardoza last year, H.R. 1251, the More Water for the Valley Act of 2011. That bill seeks to provide congressional direction with implementation as it relates to restoring a balance in water availability, which is sorely lacking. I would hope that maybe we could get a hearing on that bill. Title II of this measure repeals and replaces the San Joaquin River Restoration Act. It's going to be certainly the most contentious. Congressman Radanovich, who's no longer with us, and Senator Feinstein were asked after 18 years of litigation, when the parties that were a part of that litigation decided that it was better to reach an out-of-court settlement agreement, to provide implementation to implement that settlement agreement. I don't think Congressman Radanovich, Senator Feinstein, or myself would have come up with the provisions that were a part of that settlement agreement. But I believe in local government. And when local government decided that it was better, i.e. the 22 water districts, to reach an out-of-court settlement agreement than let the court determine, then I have to respect the opinion of those 22 water districts. They asked them to introduce the legislation in 2006. This Section 2, later on it took 3 years to implement it. The Friant water users who put forth the water and the money in an effort to restore the salmon according to the settlement agreement continue, notwithstanding the provisions of this proposal, to uphold that settlement agreement. I will read to you a letter that they sent last year to the chairman of the subcommittee. Title II, H.R. 1837, would repeal the San Joaquin River Restoration Settlement Act, prohibit further federal participation in the river restoration settlement. The Friant water users is a party to the settlement agreement as approved by the federal courts in 2006, and thus has contractual obligation to comply with the settlement, and therefore opposes the amendments to the Settlement Act that are not agreed on by the settling parties. Friant water users will continue to fulfill its obligation under the settlement agreement so long as the other settling parties, including the federal government, continue to fulfill their obligations. So, where are we? We have problems with the implementation of the settlement agreement. I've suggested to the Department of Interior they delay the implementation of the settlement agreement. There are third-party impacts that aren't being responded to. They need to be responded to. But simply to repeal this, I don't believe is going to solve a problem, because guess what? I think they're going to be back in court the next day if this legislation were to become law. To be viable, you've got to include everybody in there. Title IV of this bill attempts to protect the water rights of other water users under the legislation by codifying those rights as a part of federal law. I believe there's an amendment that would, by our colleague of ours, that would make this simply apply only to California. I'm concerned. This may not be the best idea in the long term. It certainly, under federalism, does not respect states' rights in this instance, and I think it's going to be problematic. Anyway, I'm going to support this legislation. I believe it's going to pass the committee. I believe it will pass the House. But I'd like to make a note that the authors of this legislation, I don't think, have a sincere interest in working, at least with me or Congressman Cardoza or Senator Feinstein. We've had a long history of working on a bipartisan basis. It's disappointing for me. It's disappointing for me with the water challenges in California, which traditionally and historically have not been partisan, but they've been regional. And we, you know, I tell my colleagues from other states, unfortunately, we follow that Mark Twain adage about whiskey being made for drinking and water being made for fighting. I know I want to make a final comment here, Mr. Chairman. Senator Feinstein has been a champion, along with many of us, in trying to fight for water for our valley. She's not been involved, nor have I, in any constructive effort to try to work on this legislation. Let me make a prediction that unless we're willing to work together with the senator who's taken the lead on these water issues in California, with the Department of Interior, this measure today, as it's proposed, will never become law. Therefore, it will never bring a single drop of water to our valley, and it serves soundly, unfortunately, as another political soundbite. I think we can do better for our constituents by working together in a bipartisan fashion, bicameral basis, to develop and implement solutions both on the short term and the long term.
I would ask
Those
the
are the
gentleman-
efforts that will really boost our water supply. Thank you for allowing me to extend my remarks, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman did go over, and I know we have, some time here, but I'd like to get going. Gentleman from California. Gentleman from California is recognized for 5 minutes. Mr. Garamendi.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've heard an impassioned 3-hour presentation about the appropriateness of the states handling state matters. This bill goes in exactly the opposite direction. It preempts the state of California in dealing with its water issues and overrides a century of law, reclamation law, and the role of the federal government vis-a-vis the states. It simply imposes the federal will upon the states, totally counter to what we just heard 3 hours of impassioned testimony here in this committee in regard to a previous bill. Water in California is extraordinarily complex. There's 160 years of history of law, regulations, water rights, and conflict. This bill adds to the conflict without resolving the underlying problems. And that's unfortunate. In attempting to solve a problem, it actually is going to create numerous additional problems and set back the efforts of the state of California and water users, exporters, as well as the area of origin communities and water districts to try to solve problems. It overrides a major effort by the California legislature in 2009 to reach an accord on how to deal with the water issues of California. And the impacts that accord has led to a 2.5-year process, 3-year process now, to find a solution to the Delta. All of that is gone with this legislation. This legislation goes back, not to the future, but just simply goes back to 1992-94 with an accord that has physically proven to not work. The Bay Delta Accord did not work and has been abandoned by California and the federal government in favor of a new process that is underway. We need to understand the implications of this piece of legislation. It has profound impacts on every water user in the state of California by rearranging the role of the federal government vis-a-vis the state government and local water districts. There's an attempt in this legislation to deal with water rights, and that's Title IV. And perhaps it does. But the implications of Title IV with regard to other areas of the state need to be fully understood, and at this moment, it is not.
Will the gentleman yield?
And I will in time. The bill itself develops no new water. It does not. It rearranges where the water goes. It does not develop any new water. Even on the San Joaquin, it does not develop any new water. In addition, it appears as though this legislation overrides the state constitution and specifically the public trust doctrine. In doing so, it will have profound effect, not only on California, but on every other western state. Now, because there's not been a specific hearing on this legislation, as amended, we do not understand all the implications of it. I know the desires of those that are involved in this, in promoting this piece of legislation, and I understand their desire to have security in the water deliveries. But in obtaining that security, they affect others. And specifically, they will affect virtually every other water user in the state of California. In addition to that, there was a little gimme in this bill of some 900 acre-feet of water for Kettleman City. That's an interesting thing because that's water from somebody else. From whom does that water come? And where and what is the priority for that water? I have a series of amendments that I will propose, and it goes with virtually every section of this bill, not for the purpose of eliminating, but rather for the purpose of providing clarity and understanding. When dealing with water in California, you need to know the implications of every piece of every word, because every word has 100 years of law behind it, court rulings up and down the state. And when you change one word in a law, you are changing, you don't know what you're changing. But we do know that this bill has profound effect on California water law, the allocation of water, the water rights of the people of the state, and indeed the state constitution. It essentially overrides the power of the state to determine its own water future. And that is important. That is critically important. And so as I go forward with a series of amendments, I suspect it will cause great consternation, that it's going to take time. But when dealing with something this important, you better take time. With that, Mr. Chairman, I have no time to yield back.
The time of the gentleman has expired. I'll recognize myself since, and I wanted to speak on this because the issue of preemption came up. In my central Washington district is home to two of the biggest federal irrigation projects in the nation. These projects and the water delivered through them are based on the state adjudicated water rights priority system. It is a system that has worked well and should continue to work, and nothing in this bill will affect or set any precedent for Washington State or any other state besides California. But as all of us know, Washington State and any other Western states are not like California in more ways than one. In the context of today's debate, the California water system is very unique. Here you have a massive federal project, the Central Valley Project, and a massive state project called the State Water Project that operates as one unit. This coordinated approach was requested by the state and codified by the federal government in 1986. This not only preempted the state, but it also led to further federal preemptions. For example, one single federal biological opinion on endangered fish now governs both projects since they are operated as one. In addition, there are numerous examples of where the Central Valley Improvement Act of 1992, which this bill amends, created congressionally mandated in-stream flows that were not authorized by the states. Some of our colleagues here played roles in these preemptions, and they continue to play a role in attempting to expand preemptions in other parts of California and even into Oregon. It seems that when water is dedicated for fish and the environment, then it's a necessity for preemptions. Yet when it comes to protecting property and water rights on an already preempted California system, then preemption doesn't work. My colleagues on the other side of the argument really can't have it both ways. I don't like preemptions either, but it seems to me that we are dealing with a half-pregnant system here that is based on what California requested and that certain members of its delegation continued. There simply is no other system like this in the western states, and therefore I don't believe it will serve as a precedent. After all, the precedent was already set. Like many things in California, it is unique. That's why I support my Republican colleagues and what they're trying to do here to protect and defend the rights of all water users in California. Further discussion?
Chairman, would you yield?
I'll yield to the gentleman, yes.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And with regard to the 800,000 acre feet, that was the federal water, not the state water, that was reallocated. And the federal government had the power to reallocate federal water, not state water. So I'd like that clarification of your comment needs to, I think, be understood. And also, because I ran out of time and perhaps talked longer than necessary, I would like to put in the record the letter from the State of California Resources Secretary, Mr. Laird, and for the record, the letter from the two senators representing California.
Without objection, that will be part of the record.
Thank you.
Gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, continuing to turn off the water supply in the San Joaquin Valley guarantees that we will have to buy our food supply from other countries. we have always had the luxury of being one of the few countries who have been able to feed itself. So this issue doesn't just affect California. It affects the price of commodities in the grocery stores in South Carolina and all across the country. By siding with a fish instead of American jobs and American food supply, you're opening up this country to food that is not up to our standards. Furthermore, how can we, on one hand, constantly add amendments to the job-creating energy bills and the timber bill we were talking about a minute ago that prohibit exports and mandate that we buy America, but on the other hand manipulate our water supply to absolutely guarantee that we will not be buying American food for our food supply. And after that statement, I'll yield the balance of my time to the gentleman from California.
Thank you. I just wanted to clear up a couple of issues. First of all, Mr. Costa, I'm a co-author on this bill as well, and you and I not only will be working on this bill, but I would welcome to work together with our two U.S. senators as well. I agree. We have to find a solution, and I think that it needs to be a bipartisan solution. Secondly, Mr. Garamendi likes to talk about states' rights, but when you were Deputy Secretary of the Interior, CVPIA was one of the things that you pushed through, which preempts states' rights. So what we're trying to do is actually go back to states' rights, the Bay Delta Accord, which I'd like to just state for the record, when you were Deputy Secretary, you were quoted as saying, "As I talk to others wrestling with water issues across the nation, I cite the Accord as a model for other states. I want to reiterate my continuing support for this consensus process and reaffirm the Department's commitment to work cooperatively to achieve the goals before you." All we want to do is go back to those goals that you so proudly supported. But secondly, let me go on to say, and 2 years after that, you again said, "The Accord described new ways to meet the requirements of laws, the Endangered Species Act, the Central Valley Improvement Act, the Clean Water Act, as well as certain state laws. We are working together in a comprehensive long-term strategy to restore the health of the Delta and the Bay." We want to go back to the Bay Delta Accord. We just want to make sure that in the process, we don't lose all of those jobs in the Central Valley or all of those jobs around the Central Valley, because in the process, with new water law, you have put Valley residents out of work. And I yield back to Mr. Duncan.
Thank you.
And
Would you yield,
I
sir?
yield back the balance.
Gentleman yields back his time. Is there further discussion on the bill? Gentlelady from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And of course, being from Southern California, we have the north versus south issue on water deliveries. So that is very, very critical to us. I now yield to Mr. Garamendi.
Thank you very much. Mr. Denham, my colleague from California, I appreciate you quoting me, because that's precisely what we have to do to solve the problem. We have to work together. And in fact, in those days, nearly 2 decades ago, we came very, very close to an agreement that would have resolved many of these issues. I spent 3 years of my life putting that agreement together. And we were sitting down around a table in Los Angeles, at Long Beach, all of us, Southern, Northern, all water users, to sign an agreement. Unfortunately, that agreement was not signed because Westland's Water District got up from the table and walked away. And that was the beginning of the failure of the Bay Delta Accord. The intervening years until 2006-07 resulted in chaos and a collapse of the species in the Delta, salmon and other species. So here we are.
Well, the gentleman, just to correct.
Yes, please. I will.
Gentlelady from California has the time.
Finish my comment, and then I'll see if my colleague would want to yield. Where we are today is a major effort by the state of California and the federal government working together through state legislation and a major bond act that may be on the ballot in November. This particular bill will set aside those efforts. Much has transpired over the intervening years between 95, 96, when I was working on this project, and where we are today. This particular piece of legislation has profound impact on what the state of California and the federal government are trying to accomplish in the Delta, and with the BDCP process as well as a state water bond based upon the law of the State of California and the co-equal goals of the State of California, as mentioned in that law. That's unfortunate, because it's going to create a situation in which, if this becomes law, those programs will not proceed. And that's not good for the South and the water exporters as well as the Delta. And so what I would like to see happen is a very careful analysis of what each of these sections in this bill means to California. And I would also iterate, once again, that in this legislation there is no new water. There is no new water. It simply shifts around the water supplies of the State of California as they exist today. It does take water away from the environmental account. The 800,000 acre-feet disappear. And so we're going to go back and forth and debate this many, many times. I'll let my comments go at that. I was very, very proud and very pleased with what we tried to accomplish in the 90s. And what we tried to accomplish was precisely what we need to do now to resolve the water issues. This legislation goes in exactly the opposite direction.
Reclaiming my time, Mr. Chair. For the record, I have information that the 30 to 50,000 job loss quoted by Mr. Denham is not quite accurate. No more than 7,000 jobs lost due to all water shortages, including the entire drought. Richard Howitt of UC Davis predicted job losses for water shortages in 2009. However, he later joined Dr. Jeffrey Michael of the University of the Pacific in debunking his own numbers. These two facts have been facts for more than 2 years, through September of 2010, for the record. And I would like to be able to have this introduced into the record as an email so that there is proof that this is fictional. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Without objection, it will be part of the record. Gentlelady, yield back. Did the gentlelady yield back her time?
I yield back.
Gentleman from Utah is recognized.
Does that go in the record?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate that. The gentleman from California, Mr. Denham.
Thank you. I just wanted to
yield to him.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to clear up a couple more misconceptions. Look, there are many experts out there that will try to claim that everything is rosy in the Central Valley. All you have to do is come visit, which is why we continue on a bipartisan level. The President has been in office for over 3 years now. Why we continue to invite him to the Central Valley. He can come to California as many times as he wants to fundraise. All we're saying is, one of these trips, you've been there over a dozen times, just stop by. See the double-digit unemployment. We don't need an expert from some other area of the state or some area of the rest of the nation to say how great things are. Come see the double-digit unemployment. Come see that it's twice the national average. Come see a city like Mendota that's 40% unemployment and look at the bread lines. Then you'll see it's not a rosy picture. But I just wanted to clear up a couple things. This by no means gets rid of the Bay Delta Accord, the 800,000 acre-feet. What this does is say, we're going to stick to the agreement of 800,000 acre-feet and not make sure that it's double or triple that. Because when you double or triple it and siphon off all this water for other purposes and send it out to the ocean, it absolutely shuts down our jobs. And secondly, Mr. Garamendi said that Westlands walked away from the negotiating table, but I'm looking at the document that was signed here by the San Luis Delta Mendota Water Authority, which Westlands is a part of. They agreed. They signed in writing to agree to the Bay Delta Accord, and that's why, again, they're supporting this bill again today. I yield back. Thank you.
Would you
Yield
like
back.
Yields back his time. Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want the folks here to know I support the legislation. I think at a time, Mr. Denham, Mr. Nunes, Mr. Costa, at a time when we're trying to find jobs and a time when we're trying to bring this Congress together, work in a bipartisan fashion, I think it's important that we not let extreme views get in the way of doing something constructive. And what I'd like to do is yield the balance of my time to Mr. Costa.
Thank you very much, the gentleman from Oklahoma. I appreciate everybody's focus on this effort, but I represent the area that was ground zero during the height of the hydrological and regulatory drought that caused the losses of many, many jobs. We can debate this study or that study. The fact is, I represented the people. I was trying to help with the food lines in Mendota and in Fireball and San Joaquin. That was my district. And I take a little bit of a little challenge to those who want to raise the issues of these difficult times that these farm workers and these farm communities and these farmers had as a result of the impacts of the combination of the lack of rainfall and regulatory restrictions that limited the flexibility for the operations of the projects in 2009 and 2010. I don't want them to happen again this year or next year, which is why I support the essence of Title I and Title III in this legislation. This legislation is not going to become law, sadly, unless we can work with Senator Feinstein on this effort. It then becomes just an empty promise, another political statement. I am solution-oriented. I want to get something done. I've spent my entire legislative career, both in Sacramento and in Washington, trying to bring more water, more economic well-being to the people of the valley I love, where I was born and raised, and where 3 generations of my family farmed, and I farm still today. So I don't take any backseat to anybody who wants to talk about the pain and the suffering that took place. It's real, and therefore we need to solve some problems, not just for the valley, but for the entire state. We have a water system that was designed for 20 million people. Today we have 38 million people. By the year 2030, we're going to have 50 million people. And yes, one other thing. When the Secretary of Interior testified yesterday, I made note, I don't know who was listening, that we last year had 7 billion people that were recorded in the planet. By the middle of this century, we're going to have over 9 billion people. The production of food and fiber in this nation is a security issue not only for us, but for the world. And therefore, we should not be cavalier or dismissive when we talk about the importance of the production of food and fiber in the San Joaquin Valley, which is perhaps the most abundant of agricultural regions in the nation, but maybe anywhere in the entire world. I'm proud of what those farm workers and what those farmers and what those farm communities produce. So I would like folks to look on how we might work together on a bipartisan basis, yes, in both houses, because for my freshman Republican colleagues who are getting frustrated about sending bills over to the Senate and they become one-house bills, let me tell you, as a practitioner of legislation, of a person who always looks for the bottom line on how you get something done, I can tell you, this is going to be a one-house bill unless we're willing to sit down with the senators from California who are the most focused on this issue. So with that, I yield the balance of my time.
Will the gentleman from Oklahoma yield?
The gentleman from Oklahoma has time.
I thank you, and I thank the gentleman from California for his cooperation, offers of assistance and support in this legislation. It is true, when both houses and the White House were controlled by Republicans, and more recently when both houses of Congress and the White House were controlled by Democrats, these problems were never addressed. We look forward to, for the first time, getting a bill through this House that will address this issue. Look forward to working with the Senate in its role as an independent House, and certainly welcome the good offices of the gentleman from California in assisting that effort. By moving this legislation, through the House of Representatives, we will have taken a giant step that has evaded Congress for many years.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The gentleman from Northern Mariana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield to lady from California.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my colleague, Mr. Costa, has made a very good point about working together. Apparently, nobody's really sat with both senators, because I've got a letter that is being introduced to the record already by my colleague Garamendi, but there's others I'd like to submit in opposition to the amendment, and that includes 17 elected officials, 8 newspapers, 4 water districts, business groups and environmental groups, 25 fisher flyers, guides, 3 tribes, et cetera, and I'll have it for the record.
Without objection, to be part of the record.
And I'd like to then quote from an August 1st letter last year from Western States Water Council. The Council opposes any weakening of the deference of state water law as now expressed in Section 8 as inconsistent with the policy of cooperative federalism that has guided reclamation law for over a century. This is a threat to water right and water right administration for all Western states. I continue with a letter from California Natural Resources Secretary John Laird. It would overturn a century-old precedent in water law. Congress ought not to preempt the rights of states to manage their own water under state water right law. If this bill passes, no state will be safe from congressional interference in their water rights. I certainly, Mr. Chair, understand some of the impact and the last one that I would like to introduce into the record is today's from the San Francisco Chronicle that indicates that they agree to the statement from Jerry McNerney to steal water from one community to benefit another is unconscionable. We agree. The House should reject this brazen water grab. So interesting that only certain people feel that this is okay for everybody. Friant, which represents over 20 water agencies, is against this bill. So it isn't just a few or those, there are portions of it that might be something that needs to happen. I understand that and I agree. We also need to understand that Southern California also gets the brunt of anything, and especially Mexico, which gets the end result of any water going down towards them by treaty. So we need to be able to see all of the whole picture. So we need to sit at the table, and I've yet to hear either Mr. McClintock, Mr. Denham, Mr. Tipton, or anybody else ask me in Southern California, as the ranking member of the Committee on Water and Power, Subcommittee on Water and Power, of what do we feel we need to do to work cooperatively. So talk about cooperation, and the staff to staff is one thing, but member to member, Mr. Hastings, I've approached you on certain issues, and you and I have sat down and talked them over. Am I correct?
That's correct.
So with that, sir, I would like to then yield to Mr. Garamendi if he has any further comment. Thank you. I yield back.
The gentleman from Northern Marianas yield to me. The gentleman controls. Will he yield to me?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chairman.
I always want to make a point here, because this has been a fascinating discussion, and I suspect when we get to the amendment process, that'll be equally fascinating. But there is a solution to this. And the solution, we seem to be, in many cases, talking over each other. We have what we think here, and I applaud my Republican colleagues for a solution to the problem. And I'm going to do everything I can. If this bill comes out of committee, I'm going to do everything I can to see it passes the House. Now, if the Senate, and remember, my colleagues from California have said that the senators have been very active in this, wonderful. That's a different House. Let them pass a bill where their priorities are. I don't know what their priorities are. I really don't. And then if it's different than our priorities, we have a mechanism by which to resolve those differences. We'll go to conference, and we'll work out the best of everything. But it seems to me, having sat through here as a ranking member and see what happened in California with absolutely no legislative response, just rhetoric, that didn't get the job done. Now, is there going to be, this is a legislative response, is there going to be rhetoric associated with that? Of course. That always happens in the political arena. But for goodness sakes, if California wants to have a solution, then both houses should act on it with their responsibility. We are acting on that, and we're starting that action here in the House today. I hope the Senate will do likewise, and we'll come to a solution that hopefully will be agreeable to everybody. But you've got to start someplace, and that's what this effort is all about, and I thank the gentleman for yielding.
Would the gentleman yield?
He has the time.
Yes, I do.
Just for the point on record, I was more frustrated than anyone because I was at ground zero. But we did pass legislation that created the intertie, which had been backlogged for 20 years. It's operational as of last month. That's 35,000 acre-feet of additional water. We did pass legislation that expedited transfers for 2 years. It's now permanent, that helped alleviate the situation. And we did, after a lot of painful effort, get the administration finally to utilize some administrative flexibility that brought more water in 2010.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Is there further discussion on the bill? If not, we will start the amendment process, and my understanding is the gentleman from California has an amendment, and the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes. It's in your packet to explain his amendment and the nature of his substitute, and without objection, the amendment is considered read and shall be considered as a base text. Without objection, so ordered. The gentleman from California is recognized for his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just apropos of the conversation we've just had, I would remind the gentlelady from California when she chaired the Subcommittee on Water and Power, minority Republicans begged and pleaded to hold a hearing in the Central Valley to hear firsthand of the devastation these policies had caused. We were rebuffed to the point where we had to call our own hearing informally to take that testimony. Mr. Chairman, as I said in my opening statement, this amendment has been painstakingly negotiated and crafted over a period of 8 months in response to the concerns raised over the security of senior water rights in Northern California. The concern, which we took very seriously, involves the interaction of California's tangled state and federal jurisdictions with water. The concern was that a change in federal law could trigger adverse state actions affecting the property rights of those senior water rights holders. And California is notorious for abridging the property rights of its citizens. As I said during the hearing on June 13th, no legislation will clear this subcommittee that in any way undermines local area of origin water rights as long as I have anything to say about it. I think this amendment not only makes good on that promise, but materially strengthens those rights. During those 8 months, we consulted and negotiated with over 60 Northern and Central California water agencies and actually achieved a peaceful settlement of long-standing disputes that have simmered too long among them. In fact, a joint statement was issued yesterday that included the Tehama-Colusa Canal Authority in Northern California and the Westlands Water District in Central California that have been bitter adversaries for many, many years. It reads in part, and I quote, "Water agencies in Northern California areas of origin and the export service areas of the Federal Central Valley Project and the California State Water Project are now speaking with one voice concerning the benefits of this legislation." I'd ask unanimous consent to enter the full statement into the record. Very simply stated, this amendment brings the full force of federal law to defend the rights of all water users throughout the system. The Northern California Water Association, speaking as the umbrella group for all of the water districts in Northern California, writes in part, quote, "The bill, if enacted, now contains provisions that would not only protect the interests of senior water rights holders in the Sacramento Valley, but would also provide significant material water policy improvements to current federal law. The bill, if enacted, would provide an unprecedented federal statutory express recognition of and commitment to California's state water rights priority system and area of origin protections. This is important for the region to provide sustainable water supplies for productive farmlands, wildlife refuges, and managed wetlands, cities and rural communities, recreation, and meandering rivers that support important fisheries." Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter the full statement of the Northern California Water Association into the record. The assertion of federal supremacy in this matter is firmly rooted in the Constitution. Indeed, in 1978, the United States Supreme Court clearly stated in California versus United States that a clear congressional directive would have invoked federal supremacy over any conflicting state law governing operations of a reclamation project. This measure does precisely that. More importantly, the 14th Amendment provides Congress with both the authority and the duty to protect the property rights, including the water rights, of every citizen against encroachments by state governments. This measure clearly and unambiguously does so. This bill initially arose because contracted water that was desperately needed to support the prosperity of an entire region and had already been paid for was instead expropriated and blissfully and cavalierly dumped into the Pacific Ocean. This bill still protects against a repetition of this tragedy, but with this amendment it has grown into a measure that might not end California's notorious water wars, but at least calms the troubled waters among all those communities and families who depend upon this precious resource. It places senior water rights holders in a more safe and secure position. It treats our water as the precious resource it is. It restores balance between human and environmental uses of that resource. I want to thank the many legislative offices and our subcommittee staff for countless hours spent in shuttle diplomacy among these many diverse agencies, and I want to thank the many staffs and officials within these agencies for their goodwill, their earnest efforts, their honest compromises, and their professional dedication to the residents, families, and businesses that depend upon them.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The gentlelady from California is recognized for 5 minutes as a ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I would be delighted to be able to counter some of the points that my colleague, the chair of the subcommittee, made, because I had no idea there was a Title IV until last night, and I didn't read it. I apologize. I do not know what it contains and how it affects what we need to do, but I'd like to make a little correction for the record. I visited Northern California at least 4 times, 3 recorded, Pombo, Calvert, myself, and then 2 others, and I don't remember who I went with, but I did visit farms. And Mr. Costa invited me. I did visit some of the farmers. I did talk to them. So your allegation is incorrect, sir. The fact that this defends all rights of all water users, I can't tell you that it does, because I have not read any of these amendments, because they were handed to me last night, and I've just been able to go through some of them, and because they refer to sections that I don't know what they are until I look at the bill itself to see what it corrects or what it deletes. There was not enough time to be able to absorb and be able to send this information to those individual water agencies that I work with, whether it's the state water resources, whether it's my water agencies themselves, and I'm talking about my local water agencies, including the Metropolitan Water. So in essence, I would be voting on something that I have no idea what the impact's going to be on the users in my area, which is Southern California, which normally pays the highest bill for water. And I've stated that before. We get subsidized water in Northern California. They get all the water they want, and we pay through the nose, and we get a ration when it comes time to ration. Mr. Chair, I would love to be able to continue dialogue. I have 2 amendments, and I'll address myself to those as time does come by. But I have great reservations still about this bill, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Let me make a announcement here. As you know, the House is not going to go in until 3 o'clock. Hopefully we can finish by 3 o'clock, but if we don't, we should be prepared to come back after votes in order to finish this bill tonight. And secondly, Mr. Garamendi has a number of amendments. We have now collated that, and I am going to ask staff to pass those out so that when Mr. Garamendi offers his amendments, they'll at least be in every member's possession. So with that, is there further discussion on the amendment in the nature of a substitute? If not, we'll go to amendments to the ANS. And I'll recognize Mrs. Napolitano. She has 2 of them as a ranking member. Whichever one the gentlelady would like to offer first.
I'll start off, Mr. Chairman, with amendment number 14. It's a very simple amendment.
Okay, the number 14 is in your packets. The Napolitano 014. The gentlelady is recognized 5 minutes to speak on her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment creates a revenue stream through an elimination of interest-free, I repeat, interest-free subsidy. This will require that any new contracts or renewed contracts must, their new contracts must be paid back with interest. The price of the water with interest and the payback of the debt with interest. When reclamation was established in 1902, it was meant to deliver water to farms with a maximum of 160 acres. Subsequent congressional action has changed the acreage limitation along with a repayment contract for these projects. Congressional action has also made the repayment of the project debt interest free for the irrigators, while municipalities like mine, my constituency, and power users pay the interest. This amendment removes the role of the federal government in protecting the environment and the public good. If we are removing the role of the federal government, we should also remove the federal subsidy associated with a renewed or new water contract. My constituency must repay any project with a subsequent interest. My constituents also have paid for new projects like the Diamond Valley Reservoir through our ratepayers and local water users. It was not paid for with federal money. Cutting this subsidy will help to cut our deficit, and I urge my colleagues to support this amendment. I yield back.
Discussion on the amendment. The gentleman from California.
Well, Mr. Chairman, essentially what this amendment does is to impose interest on CVP irrigation capital repayment contracts after those contracts have already been agreed to and let. This is not only contrary to any other reclamation irrigation capital repayments in the entire western United States, but it also serves as another cost on CVP water users, since they already pay their portion of $50 million annually into the CVP Restoration Fund. Now, I have often criticized the gentlelady for supporting policies that create conditions that are sending our water rates through the roof, but this proposal does so quite directly and dramatically. It is punitive, it is precedent-setting, and it is a sure way to put family farmers, particularly smaller family farmers up north, out of business.
Would the gentleman yield? I concur with the gentleman's comments. I think it's punitive, especially when you look at those farmers that would be impacted the most. And therefore, what we're talking about is increasing the cost of water in times when we want to be encouraging the production of food and fiber. So I would oppose the amendment. Thank you very much.
Is there further discussion on the amendment? If not, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from California. As many of us in favor will signify by saying aye. Those opposed say no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Roll call is requested. Those in favor of roll call raise their hand. Sufficient number have raised their hand. The roll call is ordered. Pursuant to my prior announcement, this vote will be postponed. Further amendments, gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Tipton. I understand. We're going back and forth. Mr. Tipton is recognized, and that amendment is in your packet. Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment that has obviously already been distributed, and the amendment I offer recognizes a long-standing precedent of federal deference to state water law. This amendment will make it clear that the unique circumstances in California which require the assertion of federal supremacy to protect existing private water rights will in no way serve as a precedent for federal supremacy of state law in any other state. Adoption of this amendment will safeguard state water law and interstate compacts which have served western states well for over a century. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Is there further discussion on the amendment?
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi.
It'll be interesting to see how the vote turns out on this one, since, Mr. Chairman, you suggested this wasn't necessary. However, I will vote for it.
Is there further discussion?
Yes.
Gentleman from California, Mr. Costa.
Just to underline the point I made earlier on, the federalism and states' rights, I guess, as long as the short time I've been around here, is in the eye of the beholder. Clearly, we all have different points of view as it relates to when it is appropriate for the federal government to preemption and not. With the complexity of California's water laws, other areas, I hope that should this legislation ever become law or something like this, that my farmers in the area north, south in California don't ever rue the day that were codified in federal law because of the law of unintended consequences, but I will support your amendment.
Further discussion, gentlelady from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this amendment gets at the truth of this legislation. It's so bad for California that Mr. Tipton would like to make sure it doesn't affect his state or any other state. It doesn't go far enough. The reality is that these circumstances are not unique to California. Opens a floodgate for the rest of the western states. Any state with a prior appropriation doctrine, like Colorado, Wyoming, and the rest of the 17 western states, should be concerned what is happening in California. And that was evidenced by the letter that was written by the Western Water Councils of Governors. This legislation to California is akin to if oil shale companies ask Congress to move legislation to jump to the head of the prior appropriation line in Colorado, take the water away from farmers on the west slope without any environmental responsibility. This amendment stops a bad precedent, but it doesn't stop similar bad bids from moving forward. Subcommittee received a letter dated last year from the state of Colorado stating that H.R. 1837 is an unwarranted intrusion on the rights of states to allocate and administer rights to the use of water, state water resources. They go on to say that to allow this act to proceed would have the proverbial monkey wrench in the machinery. This is why I urge Congressman Tipton to support my amendment, where nothing in this act shall preempt the rights of the state of California as well as any other state in this union. I urge my colleagues to vote no and to support my amendment, which protects all of our states. I yield back. I yield to Mr. Markey.
I thank you. In 1929, the Belgian surrealist painter René Magritte painted a painting of a tobacco pipe. And under the pipe, he painted the words, "This is not a pipe." But of course, it was a pipe, or at least a painting of a pipe. The Tipton Amendment has a similar surrealistic quality to it. The amendment states that the violence this bill is doing to water rights in California is not a precedent. But of course, it is a precedent. Others in the West who may wish to restructure water rights elsewhere around the West will look to it as a precedent. So I would say to the gentleman from Colorado, a very nice job, but no cigar or pipe, you know. And clearly you are going to set a precedent with this that will open up everyone else's ability to point to this as a precedent and say, why can't we open up something that we're not happy with as well? And so the bill sets a bad precedent. And we just can't get around that fact by denying the fact that it is a fact that a precedent is being set. I urge the defeat of the amendment, and I thank the gentlelady for yielding.
Mr. Chairman.
Further discussion, the gentleman from California, Mr. Denham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with you that this amendment probably is not needed. This very simply is again, I want to reiterate, this bill is the Sacramento-San Joaquin Valley Water Reliability Act, which would restore water supplies, provide job certainty. No new water storage. We still need to get that. But will provide certainty to farmers and communities in California's San Joaquin Valley and decrease reliance on foreign food sources. It's a very simple bill just for California, but as my good friend Mr. Tipton eloquently put it last night, he wants an insurance policy, and I am more than happy to support his insurance policy to make sure that this only deals with California. I yield back.
Gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I agree that the measure really simply states the obvious, and that is that California is unique among all of the states in that it has the Central Valley Project, which is a federal project, but that is also part of a coordinated operating agreement with the State Water Project, that agreement made at the request and consent of the State of California. Now, there are no other arrangements like it, to my knowledge, anywhere in the United States, and the doctrine of federal supremacy over all matters arising from federal water projects is well established.
Further discussion? If not, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to request a recorded vote.
Well, we haven't voted yet. As many as are in favor will signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No.
Is now my time?
Now you can do it.
Okay.
Those in favor request for a recorded vote will raise their hands. Sufficient number having raised their hands. The recorded vote is ordered, and this will be postponed pursuant to my prior announcement. Further amendments, the gentlelady from California, Mrs. Napolitano, has, I assume, is 003 that you're offering. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This legislation is breathtaking in its attempts to undermine the rights of California and, again, set precedent to amend other state constitutions. It prohibits the state from taking any action as required by the California Water Code and state constitution. This is a violation of Californians' rights. Legislation is far more heavy-handed than an ordinary preemption, which exempts a federal activity from the effect of state law. This affirmatively directs the state of California to act, or in this case, not to act, in a particular manner. My amendment protects the California Constitution, and as far as I'm concerned, many other constitutions throughout the United States, in that nothing in this act shall preempt or supersede the Constitution of the state of California. In protecting our state's rights, this amendment also reiterates that nothing in this act shall preempt or supersede any other state's constitution. Preempting our state's constitutions is a very slippery slope. It's dangerous, it's unprecedented, it's extreme, it's radical. I ask my colleagues to support my amendment with a yes vote, and yield back my time.
Mr. Chairman.
Further discussion, gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock.
Mr. Chairman, my friend, the gentlelady from California, has said that she's not read the amendment, so she probably missed the part where the entire title is directed at enforcing and protecting existing water rights of the people of California. That is the entire purpose of it. That is why it is commanded broad bipartisan support by the water districts representing the users of California. I would warn her also that the 14th Amendment does trump state constitutions. That's its purpose. Its purpose is to protect the property rights of every citizen of the United States against encroachments by state government. Ironically, the position that she is taking is the same as those of others with whom I doubt she would like to cast her lot in the 1960s. I know that's not the intention of the gentlelady, but that is the force of the argument that she is making, is that somehow states are allowed to abridge the property rights of their citizens without interference by the federal government. That went out with the 14th Amendment. She might want to brush up on her reading. And with respect to federal supremacy over federal water projects, again, that has been well established. Her doctrine would actually do exactly what she accuses us of doing, turning federal water law on its head. I might also add that the House has pending H.R. 3398, the Klamath Basin Economic Restoration Act, which preempts both California and Oregon water law. Specifically, it tells Oregon and California how to allocate its water. If these states choose to allocate it differently, it would require an act of Congress to do so, and it is co-authored by, could it be, my friend, the gentlelady from California. I yield back.
Would you gentlemen yield?
Would the gentleman yield before he yields back? Sure.
Thank you. Thank you very much for yielding, Mr. McClintock. And I'm glad you quoted a section I haven't had a chance to read because of all the things that I had to compare the actual bill with all the amendments that your amendment does cover. And unfortunately, really, you're right. So if this is already in legislation, why not make this an insurance that it's not going to happen? And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Further discussion on the amendment? If not, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from California. As many as are in favor will signify by saying aye. Those opposed say no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Roll call has been requested. Those in favor, roll call or raise their hand. Roll call is ordered. Pursuant to my prior announcement, this vote will be postponed. Further amendments, Mr. Costa has an amendment 008. Is that correct?
Yes.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes on his amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the discussion and the dialogue we're having on this important legislation. as has been stated, I think, by a number of the members of the committee, while this legislation, particularly in Section 1 and Section 3, focuses on the flexibility that I think is necessary as it relates to the operations of the federal and state water projects, there is nothing really in this legislation that will provide additional water to California's much needed addition for our long-term water supplies, as I mentioned earlier. With only the current situation, we are, as I asked the Secretary of Interior yesterday, on the studies on the 4 surface reservoirs that have been considered, raising of Shasta, Sites Reservoir, expansion of Los Vasqueros, and the Temperance Flat Reservoir on the San Joaquin River. I think it's timely, given the Department of Interior's release last week of updating and Secretary Salazar's comments yesterday of 2013 as the timeline for going forward with what seems to be at this point the best prospects for additional water supply, which is raising Shasta Dam 18 feet. Its costs are about $1 billion. My amendment would allow the authorization of the raising of Shasta Dam. It would not require the moving of the freeway or the railroad. Obviously, there are issues that would have to be resolved in terms of, first and foremost, how it's paid for. My amendment basically creates a flexibility for the payment to be by the water users, the federal contractors, but allows for a circumstance under which state water contractors could also purchase or pay for a portion of the supply, as well as individual districts. There with Shasta is a component for additional power generation that could be developed. It is very promising for a cost of $1 billion, 150,000 acre-feet of annual additional new supply of water. I think that this is an amendment I would hope would enjoy bipartisan support, and I think it would improve the nature of the bill, and I would ask for an aye vote.
Gentleman yields back his time. Is there further discussion? Gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock.
Mr. Chairman, first of all, I'd say to the gentleman that the bill does move us pretty dramatically toward bringing additional sources online. First of all, it encourages water banking. It makes possible the recycling of environmental water. It makes possible far more efficient transfers of water from areas of surplus to areas of shortage. And it sets a 2016 deadline for bringing 800,000 acre-feet of new water into the system. The gentleman is well aware I am very sympathetic to the objective of raising Shasta Dam, and I have no doubt that it will pass any cost-benefit analysis many, many times over. We are trying to restore the beneficiary pays principle to all water projects rather than the recent trend, which has been to raid the general taxes paid by one region to pay for projects that exclusively benefit another. We want to reestablish that principle of beneficiary pays that built the great water projects of the West until very recently. I think the American people are tired of Congress robbing St. Petersburg to pay St. Paul, and that's why the financing mechanism, I think, in the gentleman's proposal needs some work, but it is certainly supportable. Here's one problem, though, that is insurmountable with respect to this bill. The gentleman should be well aware that the House rules prohibit congressional earmarks, and no bill can be brought to the floor that contains them. In fact, we have had repeated drafting sessions with legal counsel to assure that this measure doesn't run afoul of this rule. The gentleman should know that adopting this amendment into this bill would kill the bill, and I certainly wouldn't want it to be said that the gentleman had tried to kill a bill
Would the gentleman yield?
Support of his local districts.
Would the gentleman yield?
Certainly.
Certainly is not my intent to be a hostile amendment. The intent of the amendment is to bring more water to California, which I think we both support. Yesterday, we had an amendment on the floor that would have provided additional funding for 4 states on a division of royalties that is part of the continuing debate that we're discussing. If that doesn't look like an earmark to me, it certainly looks like an earmark to me. And now I guess I'm going to clearly abide by the ruling of the chair, But this is not an earmark. This is an attempt to bolster and improve the water supply of California. There are 4 current sites, as you know, that are being considered that would add to the supply of water in California. This is one of them. This is the most promising, as you indicated, from a cost-benefit analysis. And I think we should, in some fashion, figure out how we can support it. If it's a problem as it relates to the impact of the legislation, then I'm willing to work with the chair. But what we're trying to do is bring more water to California.
Reclaiming my time, I share the gentleman's intent to do precisely that. I want to compliment him on his leadership on this issue and pledge to work with him to bring about exactly that results with the beneficiary pays financing that I've just discussed. But I would warn the gentleman that the manner that he has brought up this measure as an amendment, if adopted, would kill the bill, and I would urge him to withdraw the amendment, lest it be said that he was trying to do so.
Would the gentleman yield? The gentleman yield? I would tell my friend from the Central Valley in California that the gentleman from Mr. McClintock is correct in his assessment of that. And so I'll yield back to the gentleman. Further discussion?
Legislative inquiry, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to just better understand why it's defined as an earmark.
Where is that?
It's not in my district.
Well, it very simply, the House rules simply say that when you direct, and let me get precise right here.
First the definition.
Okay.
We don't
Other House
specify
rules-
an amount of funding. That's to be determined by the
You know, for the purpose of this clause, the term congressional earmark, these are the rules of the House, means a provision or report language included primarily at the request of a member, delegate, resident commissioner, or senator, providing, authorizing, or recommending a specific amount of discretionary budget authority, credit authority, or other spending authority for a contract, loan guarantee, grant, loan authority, or other expenditure with or to an entity or targeted to a specific state, which this would probably fall in that category, locality or congressional district other than through a statutory or administrative formula-driven or competitive award process.
But if I may, Mr. Chairman, the gentleman, though, is absolutely correct. The project is desperately needed. I will certainly pledge, in my role as chairman of the Subcommittee on Water and Power, to do everything we can to get such a measure through that doesn't run afoul of the rules. But it can't be in this measure the way it's rated.
Well, I think it's too bad that it can't be in this measure if we're trying to bring additional water to California. I think we all share, those of us who support these projects, and I'm not going to be argumentative with the chair. That never pays off. But the fact is that I think this definition of an earmark clearly does not apply in this instance. And as far as beneficiary pays, I agree with the subcommittee chairman on that point, which is why we tried to craft the language so that it could be open to all those who would want to participate in that 150,000 acre-feet of water, be they federal contractors, state contractors, or the power generation that is derived from that.
Well, that proposal, I think, would get very, very solid support in the subcommittee and in the Natural Resources Committee, and I'll pledge to do everything I can to work with the gentleman to bring that about.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The question then is on, does the gentleman wish to pursue the vote? Or
I would certainly, in the good nature of comedy, withdraw the amendment.
Without objection.
With a commitment that we'll continue to work on this.
I think that commitment is there. Further discussion on this, Mr. Denham?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, you have my commitment to continue to work on this as well. Obviously, Shasta is an important project in California. There are several projects that we need to move forward on to get more water storage. And Mr. Costa, I will be offering an amendment as well today that does not will not be considered as an earmark, but certainly will help us out with water storage. And if that were to fail, I'm more than happy to work with you to make sure that we get something on the floor as this moves forward to actually push water storage forward as well.
Without objection, the amendment is withdrawn. The rest of the amendments are amendments they're offered by Mr. Garamendi, and you have a packet that was passed out. You should all have that. So we will start with that and recognize Mr. Garamendi. I assume you want to start with a numerical order. That's the way I'd like to do that. So Mr. Garamendi is recognized for his amendment 002.
Packet that was handed out. Pardon? I'm trying to figure out which one 002 is. I do not see a number on the back of it.
It's entitled Application of State Law.
The last.
002 is at the very top corner printed. Yeah, the upper left-hand corner.
Very good.
Okay, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. This amendment simply says that this act does not preempt state law. We've discussed this in some detail already, but we want to make it quite explicit. And I want to just, before I go further with the amendments, state that the purpose of these amendments that I'm offering is to gain a clear understanding of the implications of the bill before us. As I said at the outset, California water law and contracts are extraordinarily complex and are based upon a long history where one law and one court decision then leads to another and yet to another, each of them building a pyramid of laws and water practices that have been created over a century and a half. And in this particular piece of legislation, there are numerous changes of individual words as pertain to earlier laws that will have a profound effect upon subsequent lawsuits and legal action. And so we need to understand the totality of it. In any case, this one deals very specifically with Section 3 as to the applicability to state law, and it simply says that the Act does not preempt state law. And since Mr. McClintock has repeatedly said it doesn't do that, then let's make it clear. Mr. McClintock, if you have any comments on why this is appropriate or not appropriate, I'd appreciate hearing them. So I would yield whatever time Mr. McClintock would like to answer my question.
Mr. McClintock, do you wish time or do you wish to have your own time?
Well, if the gentleman wishes to yield his time, I'll start there and then work
You're
on
recognized
my own.
then.
Mr. Chairman, at the invitation of the state of California, the Central Valley Project was built by the federal government nearly 7 decades ago. At that time, the state of California relinquished its rights to any water produced by the federal project. Since 1986, at the request of the state of California and by federal law, the Central Valley Project and the State Water Project are required to operate in coordination with one another. Therefore, any action taken by the federal government will impact state operations, and any action by the state will impact federal operations. That's not state preemption. It's required coordination that the state of California requested and agreed to. Furthermore, the Bay Delta Accord signed in 1994 by California Governor Pete Wilson and Clinton administration Secretary of the Interior Bruce Babbitt outlines explicit operations for the Sacramento and San Joaquin rivers and delta. California is simply being held to a previous agreement, one that had strong bipartisan support. Because the Central Valley Project and the State Water Project are unique and are not replicated anywhere else in the country, the actions prescribed in H.R. 1837 are not going to set a precedent. And I would just point out that this is an exercise of the agreement that was consented to and requested by the state of California. In fact, at the time that the Delta Accord was established, it's been said that, well, it's now outdated. This was an agreement that was made by all of the parties on strong bipartisan.
Reclaiming my time.
Did the gentleman want me to answer his question or not?
Mr. Garamendi controls the time.
I do, but you're not answering the question. My question is, why would you oppose an amendment that says this bill does not change state laws?
If the gentleman won't let me finish, I'll speak on my owed time as soon as his is expired.
Mr. Garamendi controls the time.
The amendment that I'm offering simply says that this legislation does not change state law. Now, does it or does it not change state law? That's my question to you, Mr. McClintock, as the author of the bill, or at least as the presenter of the bill. Does this change state law? If it does, then my amendment should be debated as to whether we should or should not change state law using federal power.
Is the gentleman from California yielding to the other gentleman from California?
Yes, I am.
Does the gentleman from California wish to accept the yield?
I'll speak on my own time so that the gentleman, my friend, doesn't interrupt me again.
Thank you. The time has expired anyway. Is there any other discussion to the amendment?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. McClintock.
Mr. Chairman, first, as I was saying, when that agreement, the Bay Delta Accord, was set, Bruce Babbitt made this comment. This was December 18, 1994. Any additional water necessary under any change of circumstance will be bought and paid for by the federal government. A deal is a deal. And if it turns out there's a need for additional water, it will come at the expense of the federal government. Mr. Chairman, to answer the gentleman's question directly, this concern that has been expressed by 2 hearings and that we have worked to address over 8 months is that state could conceivably interrupt the established water rights of existing contractors. This bill brings the full force of federal law to the protection of those rights. I would also point out that the Central Valley Project Improvement Act is replete with state preemptions. For example, the CVPIA required 800,000 acre-feet of yield to be used for fish and wildlife enhancement, even though this was inconsistent with state water law at the time. Ironically, these CVPIA sections were interpreted by then Deputy Interior Secretary, well, could it be, John Garamendi, to require the use of CVP water for those purposes, even though the water rights permits issued by the State Water Resources Control Board did not authorize the use of water for these purposes. The CVPIA also preempted flows on the Trinity River in northern California. And as I've already pointed out, we have pending before us the Klamath Basin Economic Restoration Act, which preempts California and Oregon law. And sure enough, I see it co-authored by the gentleman, my friend from California, Mr. Garamendi. I yield back.
Gentleman yield back. Is there any other discussion on this amendment? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment will say aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. The opinion of the chair, the nays have it. The nays have it. The amendment is not adopted. We now move on to amendment number 77077 by Mr. Garamendi.
Which is
It is in
section 109.
Yes, this strikes section 109. Mr. Garamendi, do you have, numbers up in the upper left-hand corner? Mr. Garamendi, you're recognized, but would you turn on your microphone?
Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman. Once again, words mean everything, and small changes in words mean a great deal because we are faced with a situation where we have decades of law interpreted by the courts, both state and federal courts. This particular amendment goes to a section of the bill 109 that speaks to the question of what is a fish. And by changing the language of the federal law as it pertains to the definition of a natural or artificially spawned species, there is a dramatic effect upon the survival and the success of these fish. And therefore, what this particular section does this amendment does is an attempt to try to understand what it is that the author is trying to accomplish with this change in the definition of natural and artificially spawned species. And so I will yield my time to Mr. McClintock to gain for the purposes of gaining an understanding of what his intent is and what the implications of the changes are.
The gentleman has an unfortunate recent history of interrupting, so I'll speak on my own time when the gentleman is finished.
Well, perhaps when you have your time, you might explain, since this is your piece of legislation, what you intended with the changes in the current law. What is the implication, and what are the effects of the language changes that you have made? How do those changes modify standing federal and state court decisions? It's imperative, it seems to me, that anyone that cares about both the delivery of water and the nature of the water supplies of California, as well as the native and spawned species, would have a full understanding of what your intent is, Mr. McClintock. And so at that point, I'll yield back my time.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Is there any further discussion? Mr. McClintock.
Mr. Chairman, the provision of the bill which the gentleman seeks to strike is very simple. It says, count the hatchery fish. Current law does not allow us to count hatchery fish in any ESA accounts. The gentleman proceeds on the assumption that somehow a hatchery fish is different than a fish born in the wild. The difference amounts to the difference between a child born at home and a child born in the hospital. This is the basis of opposition to this measure. The absurdity of this position, perhaps best illustrated by the lunacy that's unfolding right now in the Klamath, which the gentleman is a part of, in which $500 million of principal and interest is to be expended to tear down 4 perfectly good hydroelectric dams. Why are we doing this? Well, we're told it's to reverse the catastrophic decline in salmon population. Now, never mind that NOAA has already affirmed that it is specific decadal oscillation, a decade-long oscillation in cold water currents that is causing the lion's share of that decline and has recently reversed and now favors the Pacific Northwest. Never mind any of that. I asked the simple question, well, why doesn't somebody build a fish hatchery if the decline of the salmon on the Klamath is catastrophic? And I was told, well, we do have a fish hatchery at the Iron Gate Dam. It produces 5 million salmon smolts every year, 17,000 return to spawn as fully grown adults every year. And to add insult to insanity, when they tear down the dams, they're also going to tear down the fish hatchery. The argument that somehow hatchery fish are different is absurd. Once released, those smolts are exposed to precisely the same laws of natural selection as fish born in the wild. Returning salmon are every bit as tried and tested by the wild as wild-born fish. I would direct the gentleman's attention to an article that recently appeared in the Oregonian speaking of the use of hatchery fish on the Snake River by the Nez Perce tribe. It says in part, in recent years, the Nez Perce and state fish and game officials have deliberately stocked spawning grounds on the Snake, Clearwater, and Grand Ronde rivers with young hatchery fish to bolster anemic returns of wild fish. that hatchery supplementation strategy, releasing much maligned hatchery fish on the spawning grounds, is highly controversial, but so far the strategy has delivered. In 2010, a very good year, fall Chinook returns to the Snake and its tributaries totaled nearly 43,000, up from about 400 in 1990. In the same period, wild returns jumped to 10,000 from 78, and red counts grew to more than 5,000, up from 45. The Nez Perce see potential for Snake River fall Chinook to be the first of the 13 runs protected under the Endangered Species Act in the Columbia Basin to actually make it off the list. This measure produces the same effect on the Sacramento Delta, and I would commend it to the gentleman's attention. Unfortunately, although that's the common sense and science of the matter, this bill applies the common sense and science, and this amendment, unfortunately, would thwart it. Yield back.
Is there further discussion? If not, the question is on Amendment 0077 offered by Mr. Garamendi. As many as are in favor will signify by saying aye. Those opposed say no. No. Being the chair, the noes have it. Noes have it. An amendment is not agreed to. I just want to make an announcement here, programming update, if you will. We are notified that we are going to go back on the floor about 3:15, and we have obviously several roll call votes. I don't want to take time away from anybody that wants to obviously offer amendments, but if we don't finish before we go to the floor, then we'll come back after votes tonight to finish up. So I just want to, I don't want to cut down any debate time, but that's kind of where we are. So with that, further amendments, Mr. Garamendi, 079 is what I have next. Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
First, I appreciate Mr. McClintock's answer on the, with regard to the Klamath, which is not part of the Central Valley Project, but perhaps makes it clear that the intent of this is that we would not have naturally spawning salmon, but rather have hatchery-spawned salmon. And whatever that may mean to people that care about salmon, we'll let that go for now. With regard to the amendment before us, amendment deals with the Kettleman City provisions in this bill, which I find to be a very interesting provision that somehow an additional 900 acre-feet of water are going to be allocated to a new service district for Kettleman City. Now, when I was Lieutenant Governor, I might have thought that was a great idea since I represented Kettleman City. But since I don't, I'm curious, since I no longer do, I'm curious where this amendment is coming from, and more particularly, where is the water coming from? My amendment would say that, all right, if Kettleman City wants water, then that water should come from the Kettleman City region, not from Northern California or the Delta. So the amendment's very clear. It simply says, project water, after project water, inserted limited water originating from the San Joaquin River system. We don't need any more pressure upon the Delta.
Would the gentleman yield?
In just a moment. Let me please finish. Or upon those water rights that are secured in Section 4 of this, or in Title 4 of this bill. I'd be happy to yield to whomever requested.
Yes, Mr. Chairman and my colleague and friend, this amendment, while may be well intended, I believe is not necessary. The effort on Kettleman City is in my district. I've been working with this with the County of Kings. It's a farm working community of about 1,500 people. They have had significant water problems. The State Department of Water Resources, together with the County of Kings, have identified a water allocation that is available. They have now been putting the funding together with the USDA to develop a tank project so that the water allocation that will come out of the aqueduct that is, the last effort was a combination of state and Kings County water. is about 500 acre-feet of one and 400 acre-feet of the other. Anyway, this is well-intended, but this problem is going to be resolved, and so it's redundant at best.
Will the gentleman yield?
I think it's my time, and
That's why I was asking you to yield.
I'm sorry.
Will the gentleman yield?
Sure.
Just a question
Or
on
let
the...
me give you 51 seconds, because I'd like to wrap up.
I'll be very quick. Just a question on the amendment. I know that you are attempting to have this come from the San Joaquin River. Would you consider amending your amendment to have it come from the San Joaquin restoration flows? From the river.
No. The question here is about the regional sufficiency and the fact that the state law promotes regional sufficiency. And this amendment is an attempt to follow the current state law, which is that each region should seek regional efficiency. Mr. Costa suggested that perhaps that is already part of this. This amendment would simply require that if it is part of it, it is then going to happen that way. So with that, I will yield back my time.
Further discussion on this?
Yeah, if the gentleman would yield. I mean, at the sense of the...
Well, gentleman from...
okay.
The gentleman yielded back. The gentleman from California, Mr. Denham, is recognized.
Thank you, and I'd be happy to yield in just a moment, but I just want to remind the gentleman from California that this is in Mr. Costa's district in Kettleman City. I'm sure it's a very important part of his district. You know, it's a very small town with a truck stop and an In-N-Out and several farmers in that area, but still obviously a very important economic impact for the valley. You know, there shouldn't be a limit on the source of water, on where the water is coming from. That should be provided in a contract that that irrigation district decides to enter into. Much like San Francisco is trying to get water from wherever they can to meet their needs, MID in my district is contracting to give them water, which isn't from Hetch Hetchy, and Congressman Lundgren has raised concerns about that until they come up with their own recycling issues. Look, it's a very simple issue. Kettleman City ought to be able to negotiate a contract with whoever they want to. Why would we limit them to just one area? If Westlands wants to give them water and provide a contract to them, then they should be able to enter into that contract with them. And I yield my time to the gentleman from California, Mr. Costa.
Yes, I mean, again, the Department of Agriculture, the USDA, is trying to help through a USDA grant with the County of Kings and the Westlands Irrigation District a supply of water. They have a very problematic circumstance with the quality of their water and the quantity of their water. And so it's one of those efforts that I think is kind of a good news story in the sense that these local agencies, the county, the Westlands Irrigation District, and the community, it's like a lot of our rural communities. It's not a town. They have a service district, and it's the service district that is acting in conjunction on behalf of the some 1,500 people that live in that community off of I-5 to desperately do what is necessary, and that's improve their water supply to have a long-term reliable water supply that meets good water quality standards. And so I think this ought to be able to be worked out in a fashion that would reflect the needs of the community and helping those farm workers.
Would the gentleman yield for a quick?
Be happy to yield to the gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi.
Thank you. The way this is written in the current legislation is that it increases the demand on the Delta by 900 acre-feet. That's what it does. And that means that the pressure on the Delta, environmental as well as other water supply users, is increased. My amendment is designed to see to it that the current state law, which is regional self-sufficiency, is carried out. It's that simple. Apparently it's that controversial. Nevertheless, let's go to a vote.
Mr. Chairman.
Yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock.
Mr. Chairman, this is not part of my district. It's Mr. Costa's district, as he's pointed out, and it's not by bill. It's Mr. Nunez's bill. But I do believe that the gentleman, Mr. Costa, is correct that it may or may not be superfluous. It is my understanding that I know for a fact that you cannot get the kind of broad consensus between Central and Northern California without a lot of agreements that were being made. I suspect, although I do not know, that this was an agreement between Westlands and Kettleman. I don't know any of the details, and in fact, I don't know that for a fact, but I think that was what was happening with this particular provision. As my friend, the gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi, knows, is that because this was meticulously negotiated and discussed over many, many months, pulling one thread out of it begins to unravel the entire piece, which is what he is, I think, attempting to do, although I don't mean to speak for him. With that, I think that it's a provision that is necessary to the bill, and I'd urge a no vote on the amendment.
Further discussion? If not, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi. As many as are in favor will signify by saying aye. Those opposed will say no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Noes have it, and the amendment is not agreed to. We are now on Garamendi amendment number 082. The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes on his amendment.
Once again, what I want to try to accomplish here is for me and anybody that cares about what this is all about, is to gain a clear understanding of what it is that this legislation does. And so this amendment deals with the way in which the proposed legislation deals with the environmental laws of the United States and the state of California. Specifically, it's written in such a way as that notwithstanding other provisions of the Act, the Central Valley Project and the State Water Project shall be operated in a manner that meets all obligations of state and federal law, with operational constraints that are based upon the best available science. And this is where the issue of going back to the 1992 agreement comes into play. It's absolutely clear and stated by the judges, Judge Wenger, that the best science was not used in determining the biological opinions. And so what we're trying to do with this amendment is to A, gain clarity, and B, make it clear that decisions made about the operations of the state and federal programs would be based upon the best science available. Now, perhaps some people have problems with the best science, and frankly, the way this bill is written, it appears as though science is thrown out the door, and we're just going to go back to 1992, regardless of what we may have learned in the intervening 20 years. So that's what the amendment's for. Perhaps there may be some clarity as to purpose, and I'll yield back my time for that purpose, and I will promise Mr. McClintock that I will not interrupt if he'd like to use my remaining 3 minutes and 9 seconds.
The gentleman yield to the other gentleman?
I do.
Well, I'm perfectly content to use my own time, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from California yields back his time. Chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What the gentleman from California is basically saying is agreements of the federal government aren't worth the paper they're printed on. The Bay Delta Accord, which the gentleman lauded at the time, was an agreement, and it was recognized as such by the broad bipartisan participants in that agreement. The gentleman may not have been listening when I quoted the then Interior Secretary Bruce Babbitt, who I believe was his boss at the time, who said a deal's a deal. And if it turns out there's a need for additional water, it will come at the expense of the federal government. Any additional water necessary under any change of circumstance, will be bought and paid for by the federal government. That was a promise made. It was, while the gentleman from California served in that administration, it is a promise that has been broken, and it is a broken promise that the gentleman now assures us should be ignored simply because the science has changed. Well, the science may or may not have been right at the time, but the promise was made. And the question becomes, are the agreements of the federal government worth anything? Obviously, they aren't worth anything in the gentleman's judgment. In my judgment, they ought to be worth everything. And this bill reasserts that agreement, the Bay Delta Accord, and the amendment would thwart that provision.
Gentleman, yield back his time. Further discussion on the amendment? If not, the question is on. The gentlelady from California is recognized.
Yield to Mr. Garamendi.
Mr. McClintock, repeatedly you keep referring to the 1992 agreement, to which I was not a party. I was insurance commissioner at that time in the state of California. When I came into office, I was charged into the office of deputy secretary. I was charged with the responsibility of carrying out the Cal-Fed agreement. We worked 3 years on that. Ultimately, that effort failed, as I stated before, because Westlands got up and walked away from the table. Early on, you alluded to the San Luis unit signing on. They signed on to the 92 agreement, to Cal-Fed, not to the agreement that I had spent 3 years working on and was culminated and terminated in 98. The Cal-Fed agreement was radically changed by the court decisions, which were lawsuits initiated by the Westlands Water District. And we've gone on from there. In the intervening years, since 1998, the Cal-Fed agreement was pushed aside by state law and by federal agreement that it wasn't working, and new processes were put in place. It is, I think, inappropriate to go back 20 years and to put into federal law a program that failed for a variety of reasons, one of them being the science and the circumstances in the river overrode the agreement. They simply pushed the agreement aside. And so what your legislation does, apparently, is to go back to something that didn't work. It didn't work on the ground, didn't work in the river, and didn't work politically. And nor did it work for the participants, both the water exporters as well as those on the environmental side and north of the Delta. And so it was pushed aside. What you have done with your legislation is to go back, not to the future, but simply to go back to something that didn't work. And in doing so, you've pushed aside all of the environmental laws, both the state and federal laws. And if this ever becomes law, you've put in place a policy that will destroy the Delta. Plain and simple, it will destroy the Delta. Not only the aquatic Delta, but it will also destroy the physical Delta, because that too has changed. We now understand more about seismic issues in the Delta. We understand far more, and this amendment is pretty simple and simply says if we're going to go forward, let's base it on science. Now, if you don't care about science, then I suppose you'll oppose this amendment. But we're writing a very, very important law here, and we need to understand the implications of it, and we need to understand the history that has taken place over the 20 and indeed over the 150 years. With that, I yield back to the gentle lady from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is, and as I pointed out a little while ago to the chair, is that I'm the only Southern California, so you know the impact to us is an after effect of this piece of legislation, which I will strongly oppose, and I yield back.
Further discussion on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California? If not, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California. As many as are in favor will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Those
take a vote on this one.
Those requesting a recorded vote will raise their hand. Sufficient number having arisen a recorded vote is ordered, and that will be postponed pursuant to my previous announcement. It is now in order to consider Garamendi Amendment 083. Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes on his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment is designed to move expeditiously a water storage project in California known as Sites Reservoir. This amendment simply authorizes the Bureau of Reclamation to work with the Joint Powers Agency that's been established by the water districts and agencies in the area, in the North Sacramento Valley. The facts of the matter are that this project is being held up for lack of money for the federal government to carry out the environmental reviews, both state and federal. The lead agency is presently the Bureau of Reclamation. This project could be expedited and moved more rapidly forward at far less expense if it were to be done by the Joint Powers Agency. So this amendment authorizes the authorizes the Bureau of Reclamation to provide funds to the Joint Powers Agencies to carry out the environmental reviews that are necessary to advance the Sites Reservoir project. With that, I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Further discussion on the amendment? Gentleman from California, Mr. Denham.
Mr. Chairman, I've got a substitute amendment to the desk.
Has it been passed out? We'll pass out the substitute amendment, and as soon as that is done, the chair will recognize the gentleman from California. Gentleman from California, Mr. Denham, is recognized for 5 minutes on his substitute amendment.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Certainly I'm encouraged. I was not aware that the gentleman from California was looking for more water storage. I'm glad to see he wants to move expeditiously. But the issue at hand is making sure that not only do we move forward, but we do it in such a way that it does not do earmarks. So my substitute amendment very succinctly would be a substitute amendment to actually make it a construction amendment. You know, if you want sites done, if you want Los Vaqueros, which is in your district, or Temperance Flat, or Shasta, or a variety of other projects, rather than doing it with an earmark, this is specifically would grant them the authority to be able to get it done on their own. And so, again, no federal funds are authorized for the purpose, and each water storage project is authorized construction if non-federal funds are used for financing and constructing the project.
Would the gentleman yield?
It's a very, very simple one that just says if you want water storage, here it is. We're going to give you the opportunity to go ahead and move forward. And at this time, I'd like to yield to the gentleman from California, Mr. Costa.
Thank you very much. A question. I mean, I guess while I don't agree with the construct of both Congressman Garamendi's amendment or my previous amendment on Shasta, maybe this is the proper way in which we can, i.e. being defined as an earmark, because clearly I think you've got to really stretch to consider that. But if this then would allow for the authorization to go forward with Shasta, with sites, with the expansion of Los Vaqueros and Temperance Flat, based upon how you put together the financing, then I think this is a good substitute amendment. My question to the author of the substitute amendment is the following. That last portion of the amendment, water storage project is authorized for construction if the non-federal funds are used to financing and construction of the project. My experience with the way historically projects have been financed is not only beneficiary user pays, but also it's usually blended. I mean, you can have state, you can have federal users pay. But what if, and this is an example, the current costs are talking about $1 billion for Shasta, and the federal contractors and the state contractors come up to about a tune of $800 million, and we're shy that incremental. And subsequently, we decided in a future Congress at the time of construction that there was a public interest in providing the $200 million for refuge purposes or for some other purposes. Would this prevent the federal government from participating on closing that gap for the additional 150,000 acre-feet of water of yield that would be available should this project be built?
I thank the gentleman from California for the question. This absolutely would not prohibit it. Again, it says if non-federal funds are used. Certainly, if there are federal funds available, it would take further legislation, and I would be more than happy to work to get something like that done. But right now, if there's projects ready to go today, we ought to move forward. If the studies are done, if they have their own financing, if it's user pays, by all means. If we're all here to support water projects, if we're all here to support jobs in California, then we ought to all be united in making sure that if they're ready to go, if the studies are done, then by all means, let's let them go. Whether it's Los Vaqueros and Congressman Garamendi's district, or Temperance Flats and mine, or even Exchequer, which we're trying to study now. If the studies were done on that, I'm sure that by all means, if you want more water storage, that would be something that you would support as well.
Further discussion on the amendment.
I yield back.
Gentleman from California. Yeah, that's right. They're all from California. I just have to point out. Mr. Garamendi.
California water issue, to be sure, Mr. Chairman. It always pays to read what's before us. Let me read what's before us. No federal funds are authorized for this purpose, and each water storage project is authorized for construction if non-federal funds are used for financing and construction of the project. I guess the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. On the one hand, your first sentences say you can do it, and the second, you can't spend money to do it. You completely obviate the intent of my amendment, which is to get on with building a project. What you're basically saying here is that you cannot use federal funds in any way to build sites, Los Vaqueros, Temperance Flat, or the Shasta project. If this becomes law, you've shut the projects down, at least insofar as the federal government's concerned. I'm sure that is not your intent, and I'm sure that is not the intent of your amendment, but that's what it does. And I don't think that's what we want to accomplish. I yield.
It's very clear, very clear. Nowhere in here does it say prohibit, but it does say if, because right now we don't have federal funds. There's nothing in this bill that authorizes federal funds. There is no bill that has said, here's a pot of money, go do it. Now, if that miraculously appears, if you author a bill that wants to fund Shasta, boy, that would be great. I would love to see that bill, and I'd love to see some of these construction projects done. But what this simply says is, if non-federal funds are used, then we can move forward.
Well, perhaps.
So there are projects in California right now today that are ready to go forward, that user pays, that don't need any federal funds, that we ought to get those construction jobs going, we ought to get those ag jobs going. If you're about jobs, if you're about California's ag economy, then let's get it done.
Well, please read your amendment.
I just read it. If non-federal funds are used. It doesn't say prohibit. I don't see prohibit in there anywhere.
No federal funds are authorized for this purpose.
They're not authorized. We don't have federal funds.
Well, let me go.
I would love to see a bill that authorizes federal funds, but this bill isn't it. No federal funds are authorized under this bill. And if non-federal funds are used for financing and construction of the project, we have, again, projects out there that users are willing to pay for, that the state is willing to pay for, that there are funds available. Why wouldn't we move those forward? If you want water construction, if you want water storage, then let's do it.
Well,
and if you have money available somewhere for a different project, if there are federal funds available, then let's bring that forward in a separate bill. But right now, your bill does not offer any funds, nor does it offer any construction.
Mr. Denham, you need to read carefully and understand what you've written here.
I just read it.
You have, on the one hand, allowed the federal government to go forward, but you've also said you cannot use federal funds. I don't think that's what you want to do. Now, my amendment recognizes that that in today's budget, in fact, last year's budget and today's budget, federal funds were appropriated to move the Sites Reservoir project forward. $600,000 already appropriated. However, that money is to be used by the Bureau of Reclamation. My amendment simply says that the Bureau of Reclamation is authorized to transfer the existing funds and any future funds that are appropriated to the Joint Powers Agreement so that they can do the necessary environmental studies and later the construction programs, and they are able to do it much more expeditiously and at a far lower cost. You know, I understand, I think I understand what you want to accomplish, but you don't. Unfortunately, you don't. And the no federal funds language here prohibits what is actually going on today. If this were to become law, the existing effort by the federal government to deal with Shasta sites, temperance flats, would be terminated. That's not what we want to accomplish. What I want to accomplish is something quite simple, and that is to allow the federal money to be used by the Joint Powers Agency, which can do the project more expeditiously and cheaper. Now, if that's a problem, I don't understand what that problem would be. I would urge that that your amendment be rejected because it obviates and terminates what is already underway.
Further discussion. Gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I think the intent of the amendment by my friend, Mr. Garamendi, is obvious. It is to kill the bill. Again, under the House rules, the amendment would forbid the bill from being taken up. The gentleman from California, Mr. Denham, has offered us a way to move these projects forward without running afoul of the House rules, and it is a material step forward. Those projects are not authorized now.
That's not true.
This wording, I believe, will move them forward and applies to Shasta as well as the others.
Would the gentleman yield? Sites Reservoir is authorized for study.
I'm informed it is authorized for study, but not for construction.
That is correct, and what we're authoring...
And this moves it forward to authorize construction.
The language prohibits the use of federal money.
Will the gentleman from California yield?
That's what it
There
does.
seems to be a lot of confusion here about people not being able to read this, so let me read it just for the record. Very simply, water storage project changes your wording to construction, because that's actually what we want to do, is do construction. The Secretary, acting through the Commissioner of the Bureau of Reclamation, may partner on the water storage projects identified in Section 103, Part D, Section 1 of the Water Supply Reliability and Environmental Improvement Act, Public Law 108-361, and acts supplemental and amendatory to that act, with local joint powers authorities formed pursuant to state law by irrigation districts and other local water districts and local governments within the applicable hydrologic region to advance these projects. And finally, the most important part, no federal funds are authorized, because we don't have those federal funds for this purpose, and each water storage project is authorized for construction if non-federal funds are used for financing and constructing the project. Does not terminate anything, nor does it come up with any new money, but it certainly does authorize the projects when they are ready to get constructed and to create water storage, creating jobs in the process.
There comes a moment when you know you're going to lose the point.
Further discussion on the substitute amendment.
Yes.
Gentlelady from California is recognized.
Mr. Denham, and thank you for the explanation from both of you, but I am not an attorney. But in looking at this, the first sentence says, may partner. The very first sentence, Secretary may partner, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then it goes down to to advance these projects. Okay, fine, that's fine. But then you go to the next to the last sentence, which says no federal funds are authorized for this purpose. That would obviously say you're not going to authorize anything for what you've just stated, and yet you're telling the Secretary of Reclamation to partner. Then, of course, it goes on to no non-federal funds are used for financing and constructing, and that, of course, would include, I'm sure, operation and maintenance. Excuse me, would you clarify?
Well, the gentleman, absolutely. You know, we did have lawyers look at this. We did not have a whole lot of time. We just got Mr. Garamendi's amendments. I was glad to see that he's finally had a change of heart to actually have more construction. We certainly want to have more construction. This is a very simple amendment that addresses that. We, you know, say may partner because I didn't think that it was appropriate to dictate to the Secretary on something that they would have to do. We want to partner with them. We want to make sure that it gets done. And we want to make sure that where funds are available from
Reclaiming my
users-
time, yes, I understand, Mr. Denham. But that may partner, you're telling the Secretary they may partner. In other words, they may expend funds, time, funding for the study, whatever is required. But in the end, you say no funds can be authorized for the purpose. So you're kind of contradicting in one sentence versus the bottom of it. And that's why I wanted a clarification. Yes, I understand the jobs. We're not against construction. We're not against some of the dam building that some people are requiring. So it is just a clarification of the amendment and what it will ultimately affect. Mr. Garamendi, yes. Yield to Mr. Garamendi.
Mr. Denham, 5 times you've said that I've been opposed to construction. Apparently, you don't listen. Repeatedly in this committee, I've said that the solution to the California Water Project has several different pieces to it. Among those are the construction of off-stream reservoirs and, where feasible, Temperance Flat. Now, I've said that multiple times. I've said many other things about what we need to do to build the necessary water system. So please, do not say again that I've been opposed to constructions of reservoirs. That is not the case, has not been the case for more than 35 years. Do you understand, Mr. Denham?
I listened very well, and I've heard you, but your actions speak louder than words, and I'm yet to see a construction bill come from you. I'd love to see one.
Further discussion? If not, the question is on the substitute amendment offered by the gentleman from California, Mr. Denham. As many as in favor will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed will say no.
No.
Opinion chair, the ayes have it.
Roll call.
Recorded vote is ordered. Those in favor of recorded vote raise their hand. Sufficient number having raised their hand. A recorded vote is ordered. It will be postponed pursuant to my prior announcement. Yeah. We next have the series of Garamendi amendments that are all striking amendments, and just want to know from a time standpoint, and I'd ask the gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi, if he had considered putting these on block or if he wants to do them individually. And I certainly respect whichever decision it is. The only thing I fear is if we have probably 15 minutes to dispose of this and then vote, or we're simply not going to make the time to get to the floor, in which case we'd have to come back and vote on all of these after votes on the floor tonight. On the other hand, just got to advise, we may have some wiggle room here. And so I'll leave it up to the gentleman, but certainly he had every right to present these amendments, and with that, let's just go through the process, and if at any time there's a change, we'll work our way through that. With that,
could I engage the chair in a little question?
Certainly, I'll yield to the gentleman.
Apparently, schedules have made it difficult for many members of the committee to return for roll call votes in the near term. There are meetings and other things going on that make it difficult, and in fact impossible, for members to return. Perhaps Republican is still as both the minority and the majority here.
Well, there is no action on the floor, and all members were advised of this markup and the desire to finish this before we go to the floor. So the members of this committee were advised that that was what the procedure was going to be.
Then I shall continue.
Gentleman is recognized for his amendment number 084. Oh, I'll yield to the gentleman from California.
Just a point of inquiry, to move on these expeditiously, if we'd like to move on the Garamendi amendments in block, we'd be happy to entertain that.
The gentleman from the author of those amendments are the ones that he would have to agree to that if he leave that to his consideration.
I think it's important that we understand every element of this bill. I'm going to continue amendment by amendment.
All right. The gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi, is recognized for his amendment number 084. The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment deals with the purposes of the bill, Section 101. This is the amendment that changes, this is the language that changes the Central Valley Project Improvement Act. And specifically, my concern goes to line 9, subsection G, and it says, to ensure that water dedicated to fish and wildlife purposes by this title is replaced and provided to the Central Valley Project water contractors by December 31st, 2016 at the lowest cost reasonably achievable. The language that states the purpose of a bill becomes extremely important when you get to court. And surely, if this ever becomes law, this is headed to court. What this seems to say, and this is where I would propose to strike this and continue the present language of the Central Valley Project Improvement Act, what appears here is that the fish and wildlife water, some 800,000 acre-feet, is to be replaced somehow, and then that 800,000 acre-feet provided to the water contractors. I would point out that this is not just fish, this is water for wildlife refuges. And so, unless there's something that we're missing here, this is really an important statement of purpose. In other words, taking water away from the wildlife refuges, ducks and other species, and fish, and providing it to the contractors. Now, so therefore, given the extraordinary impact that that would have on both fish and ducks and the refuges, I would suggest that we strike this language. And that's what the amendment does. I yield back my time.
Gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock.
Mr. Chairman, one of the broken promises of the CVPIA is that the mandated diversion of 800 acre-feet of water would be replaced with new sources. Another broken promise. Now, that was in 1992. There's not been a single major facility constructed since then to honor this promise. Mr. Nunez's bill says that if such a project is not begun by 2016 to replace that 800 acre-feet that was taken, the water will be restored to its rightful owners. This amendment thwarts this provision. This amendment continues to break that promise that was made so long ago. Yield back.
Further discussion. Gentlelady from California.
Yes, I yield time to Mr. Garamendi.
Precisely the concern. 2016 is 4 years away. We just heard a very detailed discussion about what it takes to get new water. And obviously we didn't get very far with that project because, in fact, the amendment that was adopted over my amendment as a substitute prohibits construction, the use of federal funds for construction. Now, that could be changed. I mean, there could be another bill, and that could change. But and I would like to know if there's ever a project anywhere that's been built in 4 years. Not likely. So what this clearly states, given Mr. McClintock's analysis, is that the 800,000 acre-feet of environmental water is going to disappear unless a new project is put in place in 4 years. I would think that if I were a duck hunter, I would be very, very concerned about this. If I were a fisherman, if I cared about salmon, if I cared about any of the species in any of the rivers, I would be very, very concerned because, in fact, what we now see is the purpose of this legislation, which is to rip off 800,000 acre-feet of environmental water. I thank the gentleman for explaining what the purpose is. And with that, I yield back.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with Mr. Garamendi, and I hope that we take a long, hard look at how some of this legislation is going to impact not only agriculture, but also the fishermen and others. Thank you. I yield back.
General Lee yields back. A gentleman from California, Mr. Denham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The broken promise that Congressman McClintock refers to was done with the Baytelda Accord when the gentleman was Deputy Secretary of the Interior, and I want to just read the quote again. As I talk to others wrestling with water issues across the nation, I cite the Accord as a model for other states. I want to reiterate my continuing support for this consensus process and reaffirm the Department's commitment to work cooperatively to achieve the goals still before you. That was Mr. Garamendi in 1995. Obviously, replacing that water was not a priority. It is a priority now, and we're going to find the water. We're going to construct the dams at any cost. And I yield to the gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would also point out that Senator Malcolm Wallop was the floor manager of the Conference Committee report when this issue was taken up so long ago. He described the 800,000 acre-feet of CVP yield under Section B2 as, quote, upfront water designed to deal with the requirements of the Endangered Species Act and Delta requirements while the various mitigation actions are undertaken. The mitigation actions were to produce additional water supply, and nothing has been done in all of those years to do so. I would ask the gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi, what mitigation actions have been taken to replace this water?
Well, Mr. McClintock, thank you for the question. Beginning in 1995, the summer of 1995, Secretary Babbitt assigned to me the responsibility of solving the problem that you just described.
That would explain.
And thank you, unless you want to reclaim your time.
Well, it's not my time, it's the gentleman
whomever's.
to my right.
3 years of negotiations took place along the lines that Mr. Denham correctly pointed out, my quote. We were working together, and we had reached an agreement on how to secure the 800,000 acre-feet, how to do the mitigation, and how to implement the Improvement Act, the CalFed, and the CVPIA. It was done. And everybody had agreed. Everybody had agreed. And we had a meeting, a signing ceremony in Long Beach. And all the parties around the table, the Met, the water, the state, everybody, federal government, Fish and Wildlife Service, all were there. The papers were on the table. The representative from the Westlands Water District put down his pen, took his cell phone, stepped out of the room, and came back and said, we're not signing.
Reclaiming my time, that statement's already been debunked, Mr. Garamendi. Perhaps you didn't recall that exchange. I would point out that the sum total of what you've just said is nothing has happened in those 20-some-odd years to replace that water. This bill sets a firm deadline to assure that that promise, many, many years, decades later, finally is honored by the federal government that made the promise in the first place, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Very good. We now understand the intent of this legislation. To remove 800,000
Gentleman
acre feet.
Mr. Denham yields back. I want to make another announcement. It is my intention to recess at 2:45 because we'll be on the floor approximately a half hour. I think everybody needs to unwind a bit, and I have to get caught up since I'll be on the floor. And as Grace said, she needs to eat, so we'll. And then once we get to the floor, there could be up to probably 10 votes. We don't know there'll be that many of them. But immediately, I won't say immediately, I'll say 1/2 hour after the start of the last vote, we'll reconvene here, whatever time that is. So we will recess here at 2:45. Is there further discussion on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi, 084? If not, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman. As many as are in favor will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Gentlemen, recorded vote has been requested. Those in favor have raised their hands. This will be postponed pursuant to my prior announcement. It is now in order to consider amendment number 085 by Mr. Garamendi, and the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
As I've repeatedly said, words mean a lot. in water law, a word means everything. Words have been interpreted over the many decades by the courts and have led to specific contracts, both state and federal. The definition section dramatically alters words, and we need to understand the implication of those words. For example, anadromous fish has been redefined. It's not redefined as being a species that spawns in fresh water and goes into the ocean and then returns, but rather it's been defined as a fish that spawns in fresh water, goes to the ocean and returns as of 1992. Now, what does 1992 mean? Anadromous fish who did not exist in the rivers of California in 1992 are no longer to be considered in any of the issues pertaining to any river in which they did not exist in 1992. A very interesting way of precluding the issue of restoring salmon on the San Joaquin River, because there were no salmon in the San Joaquin River in 1992. Ergo, voila, no need to restore the salmon because they don't exist, and therefore the definition in this precludes the necessity of restoring salmon on the San Joaquin River. Wow. Isn't that interesting? It's not only interesting in the definition, but what it does in its purpose is to override the public trust doctrine in the California Constitution, which essentially says the rivers and lakes belong to the people of California. Belong to the people of California. And it turns out that on the San Joaquin River, and this is what 20 years of lawsuits were all about, is that the water was taken from the river. And the people's water was taken, along with the fish, along with the salmon. And so the settlement agreement, and this goes to the heart of the settlement agreement, by definition, isn't necessary because there's no salmon to restore, because you've defined away the salmon. My amendment removes these new definitions and leaves in place the purpose of the California Constitution and the public trust doctrine. So, there you have it. I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock.
My friend needs to get his thinking straight on this matter. Does he wish to protect native endangered species like salmon and a delta smelt, or does he not? The amendment, or the provision that he seeks to amend, removes bass and shad from the protections of this law. Bass and shad are not native to the delta. They are non-native, they are invasive, and they have been recognized by NOAA as one of the most significant threats to the endangered and native salmon and smelt that are in the delta. The bass are routinely found gorged with salmon smolts and delta smelts. It is rather self-defeating to declare our concern for native fish while protecting the non-native predatory species that are decimating these populations. Further, for someone who purports to value science, the gentleman is asking for an amendment that runs entirely contrary to the most basic biology of the delta. These fish are not native to the delta, and they have been predatory upon those endangered species that are. I yield back.
Further discussion. Gentlelady from California.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, we hear a lot about the endangered, invasive species that have been introduced, including the very a prolific, what do they call it, the little shells that are the zebra mussels and all the other mussels that are invasive. We've had extended conversations about who introduced, why they introduced, but nobody's saying how do we take care of them. Mr. Garamendi, I yield to you.
Mr. McClintock, I'm not going to debate the issue of fish that prey upon the native fish. That is an issue. However, your language does something quite different. The language in this bill defines anadromous fish as those existing as of a specific date. And so in those streams where they did not exist, they cannot exist in the future, or you can easily argue there's no need to replace them. And this goes to the heart of the San Joaquin River settlement. You've also in this bill, through your amendment, you've used one of those mushy words that are guaranteed to wind up in court forever. You use the word reasonable flows. Means water flows capable of being maintained, taking into account competitive consumptive uses. Again, this goes to the heart of the public trust doctrine. The California Constitution public trust doctrine, which says that there is a public interest, that is, the government of California holds in trust the waters of California. And by giving consumptive use the higher priority, you've created a situation that will surely wind up in court as to what is meant by this. What it does seem to me on the surface is that it gives consumptive uses a higher priority than those uses protected under the public trust doctrine. I don't know that if that's what you want to accomplish, all right, then let it be clear. And as I said earlier, with regard to defining anadromous as of a specific date rather than as to a species, you've accomplished something that I think we need to be aware of. With that, I yield back and ask for, I would like also to put into the record a letter from dated October 6, 2011. I'll put this in the October 6, 2011 from the Pacific Fisheries Management Council on this general subject. And there may be, I know this record will be open for a while and there'll be a new letter coming. With that, I yield back.
Without objection.
I yield back.
Yield myself and yield to the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. I just want to point out again that the effect of the bill is to remove protections from non-native invasive predatory species that are decimating the populations of salmon and delta smelt that the gentleman purports to sympathize with. The gentleman also mentioned the overall amendment in the nature of the substitute once again. And I want to emphasize to him that the entire thrust of that 8 months of work was to assure that the force of federal law would be brought to bear to preserve the water rights of every citizen of California. We're quite confident that the amendment in the nature of a substitute does precisely that. As I said, we consulted 60 districts on this, including in the gentleman's current or would-be districts, Glen-Colusa Irrigation District, Natomas Central Mutual Water Company, the Sutter Mutual Water Company, Reclamation District Number 108, Meridian Farms Water Company, Reclamation District 2035, Conway Ranch, the Tehama-Colusa Canal Authority, East Bay Municipal Utility District, and the Yuba County Water District. East Bay, Mud, and Yuba County have not weighed in to my knowledge. The rest support that amendment, and I leave it to him to resolve the differences between himself and those agencies. I yield back.
Okay. I will yield to the gentleman.
It's my understanding that those agencies support Title IV. and that they are not taking a position on the remaining portions of the bill.
The amendment in the nature, if I may, the amendment in the nature of substitute is Title IV.
It is certainly part of this substitute. There are 3 other titles, and it is my understanding that those agencies that you've described and laid out there are specifically supporting Title IV, dealing with the water rights, and not taking a position on the remaining 3 issues, or the remaining 3 titles.
If the gentleman will yield,
I'll yield to the gentleman.
I'm informed that, no, they also support Title I, which the gentleman from their region is attempting to gut.
We shall see how that works out.
I'll yield to the gentleman.
Mr. Chairman, you've been very generous, and I thank you for that. These debates are rather important for California. The issue of water rights is one thing. The issue of public trust is yet another. And in fact, the water rights in California are based upon the California Constitution, which deals first with the public trust. A long-established court, California Supreme Court issue has been very, very clear about this matter. And so from the public trust flows the water rights of the state of California. And all of the contracts then flow from that. That's the way it is. Now, the way you've written this particular definition is that in an interesting and convoluted way, you have defined away one of the purposes of the public trust, that is to protect the species in the river. I will just finally end up with this piece, and that is that I fully understand that there are many, many risks to the salmon and in all of their age groups and to other species. And one of those risks are predators, invasive species and contamination in the river, pollution in the river. All of those things need to be dealt with, and I've never said otherwise. Mr. Chairman, let's get on with the vote if we could. Thank you.
I'm reclaiming my time. The question now is on the amendment offered by Mr. Garamendi, number 085. As many as are in favor will signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Noes have it. An amendment is not agreed to. I announced earlier that we would recess at 2:45. We don't have time, obviously, if the discussion on future amendments, we wouldn't finish in 5 minutes. So my intent is to recess right now. We are scheduled to be on the floor at 3:15. There could be up to 10 votes. I suspect that the leadership will get those down to 2-minute votes. But it is my intention to reconvene 30 minutes after the start of the last vote. So if the last vote is at 4:47, then we will reconvene at 5:17.
Parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's recognized.
Do we know if these next series of votes are the last votes on the floor for the day?
They will be the last votes for the floor for the day. That's correct.
Okay. Has there been an announcement made as when we may vote on the other item on the payroll tax and SGR?
Well, if it has, I haven't gotten it because I've been here. But
yeah, no,
I think that's.
And we appreciate your patience. And
that's a work. That's a work in progress, as the gentleman knows. So,
yeah.
But no, my understanding is.
I've been here with you.
Yeah. Yeah, you do look familiar. Come to think of it. Okay, with that then.
Just got a group of Californians. We love Washington State.
Okay, with that, the committee will stand in recess, subject to the call of the chair, 30 minutes after the start of the last vote.